This is Carmen Sanders, a 22-year-old student and young woman who is quietly building a life for herself in Richland, Mississippi. Between school, work, and planning her next steps, she carried a future full of promise and, tragically, a home she thought was safe. On the night of January 8, 2010, that sense of safety was shattered. Police were called to her apartment, where Carmen was found dead. She was stabbed 15 times with a small steak knife. The stabbing was so brutal that the blade broke during the assault, and the tip was found lodged inside her ribcage. Not only that, a second weapon, a butcher knife, was used to stab her 7 more times. What was more chilling was that such a brutal act didn't come from a stranger lurking outside, but from someone who had been invited into her life, someone who knew the routines, the spaces she trusted, and the quiet rhythm of her days. But before we get to that night, let me take you back to where her story began.
They entered the apartment carefully, moving room to room. And inside the apartment, it was in disarray. Clothes were scattered throughout the space, dishes were out, drawers had been pulled open. In the living room, officers noticed soap spread across the floor, an apparent attempt to clean or remove evidence.
Because what you are about to see isn't just a crime scene or a headline. It's the life of a young woman navigating ordinary routines. And the heartbreaking truth? Violence doesn't always announce itself at the door. It sometimes waits patiently inside, behind the walls you think are safe. In January 2010, 22-year-old Carmen Sanders was living in Richland, Mississippi with her boyfriend. She had a life she was building carefully, balancing work, school, and the plans she had for her future. She was born on November 28, 1980, in Natchez, Mississippi, to Elizabeth and Charles Sanders. Carmen grew up in the same community where her parents still lived. She graduated from high school in 2006 and went on to study at Copia Lincoln Community College and Holmes Community College before enrolling at Mississippi State University Medical Center. There, she pursued medical technology, aiming to become a lab technician. Carmen was a hard worker. She supported herself. She worked multiple part-time jobs while attending school, paying tuition, rent, and all the other costs of living independently. Her days were structured, classes, work shifts, studying, and managing life on her own. Friends often admired her discipline, saying she seemed older than her years, determined to carve out a future on her own terms. By the time she moved to Richland, she was following her plan, living independently and working toward her career goals, which was a surprise when she would be found dead with multiple stab wounds in her own home, with no prior reasons to think her life would end with such cruelty. On the evening of January 8, 2010, Carmen had gotten ready to meet a friend for a late Christmas dinner. She loved the holidays and had made plans to exchange gifts and spend time with those she cared about. However, on her way, she would realize something. She realized she needed to go back to her apartment to grab the gift she had bought for her friend. It was meant to be a quick stop, a few minutes inside and then back out. But sadly, Carmen would never make it to that dinner. At around 11 p.m.
At the time, investigators noted what was missing. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, and nothing indicated that someone had broken their way inside.
Just 3 hours later, a 911 call was placed from the apartment. Carmen's boyfriend had returned home from work to meet a scene straight from a horror movie. Carmen's boyfriend at the time was juggling 2 jobs, a substitute teaching position during the day with Jackson Public Schools and a line cook position at a restaurant in the evenings. He was exhausted, working long hours to keep up with bills, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found that night. He told the operator that he had found his girlfriend dead inside their bedroom. When officers arrived at the apartment complex, he flagged them down and led them inside. He told them someone had broken into their apartment and murdered his girlfriend Carmen. Police entered cautiously, weapons drawn, unsure if the suspect was still inside. The apartment was in disarray. Clothes were scattered, drawers were open, and soap had been spread across the living room floor, an apparent attempt to clean or remove evidence. The strange use of soap immediately caught their attention. It suggested someone had tried to erase fingerprints or cover tracks in a hurried, clumsy way. It was in the apartment bedroom that officers would find Carmen's lifeless body. She was found on the floor of the room, wrapped in a comforter, There was a knife embedded in her body. It had been driven with so much force into her body that it struck the concrete floor beneath her. Not only that, another knife, a steak knife with a broken handle, lay nearby. There were clear signs of struggle, and yet there were no signs of forced entry. This suggested that Carmen knew the person who had been with her, someone who had access to her apartment and was close enough that she didn't fear them. Officers checked for signs of life, but Carmen was already gone. Her body was still warm, indicating she had died shortly before police arrived. The scene immediately shaped the investigation. The mess, the spread soap, the knives, the force used to cause such harm, all indicated violence of rage, not a random break-in. But who would want Carmen dead? That was a question investigators needed to find out, and fast. Like in many cases like this, attention quickly shifted to the people closest to Carmen. Her boyfriend's mother had arrived at the apartment shortly after police, and both were taken to the Richland Police Department. Carmen's parents were also notified and were present also. When told that her daughter had been killed, Carmen's mother collapsed to the floor, screaming. Her father grabbed his chest in shock, prompting officers to call for medical assistance. The grief in that moment was overwhelming, a raw display of pain that underscored the brutality of what had just happened. Through her tears, Carmen's mother would reveal chilling information. She immediately pointed investigators toward the person she believed responsible, Carmen's boyfriend. She believed that he had killed her daughter. When asked why she thought so, Carmen's mother would explain to investigators the ongoing problems in Carmen's relationship with her boyfriend. She said that Carmen's boyfriend would frequently have people over to the home to drink, smoke, and play video games, and Carmen had been frustrated by the constant noise, especially while trying to focus on her studies. Friends had noticed her growing irritation, and Carmen had confided that the situation was wearing her down. So they had come up with a plan. Carmen had been planning to move out with her family's help, but the plan was not to tell her boyfriend yet, for fear that he might become upset or harm her. Carmen's mother also told investigators that over the holidays, Carmen had also reconnected with an ex-boyfriend, which enraged her current boyfriend. Carmen and this ex-boyfriend had met during her time attending Mississippi State. They had lost touch after he left the school, but Carmen had reached out to him unexpectedly. Tragically, Carmen would not get the chance to leave as she had planned before the gruesome attack. According to this ex-boyfriend, he shared with detectives that Carmen had told him that her current relationship had become toxic. That revelation set the stage for what investigators would hear next. He also shared that when her boyfriend had found out that she had been communicating with him, he became enraged. Carmen's mother further added that he was extremely jealous and had even accessed her email account without her permission, further revealing his jealousy and controlling behavior. By the end of the night, detectives were seeing two pictures, one from the apartment, where violence and disorder spoke for themselves, and one from those who knew Carmen, painting a picture of a young woman planning to leave a toxic relationship. Still, the pieces did not fit neatly together. Neither explanation fully explained how a routine stop at her own apartment turned into a violent death. At this stage of the investigation, Carmen's boyfriend remained firmly under suspicion. Detectives were unsettled by his 911 call, which raised immediate red flags. Instead of first reporting the horrifying discovery of his girlfriend's lifeless body, his opening words focused on a missing PlayStation. The misplaced priorities struck investigators as deeply unusual, heightening their doubts about him. Still, suspicion alone was not enough to formally accuse him, at least not yet. The next step was to bring in Carmen's live-in boyfriend for questioning. Officers interviewed him at the station, where his mother initially accompanied him. She even began drafting a statement on his behalf, something that alarmed detectives. They needed his own words, not hers. She was asked to leave so they could hear directly from him. During the interview, he hesitated, asking whether he needed an attorney. Before detectives could respond, he dismissed the thought himself, saying it wasn't necessary for the moment. But that decision stood out. Given the gravity of the situation, investigators were surprised he didn't insist on legal counsel. It was a choice that seemed careless, or perhaps calculated. Detectives pressed him to walk them through his day. He explained that he had worked earlier as a substitute teacher, then headed to his second job at a restaurant where he was employed as a fry cook. According to his account, he returned home around 10:30 p.m. That, he said, was when he discovered Carmen dead inside their apartment. The timeline sounded straightforward, but investigators knew that in cases like this, every detail mattered. His words would later be weighed against evidence, witness statements, and the inconsistencies that had already begun to surface. He told the police that the first thing he noticed was that his PlayStation was missing, and that was why he called 911. Detectives thought this was strange. Usually when someone finds a loved one hurt or dead, the very first thing they say is about the person, not about something like a game console. His focus on the PlayStation stood out, and investigators made a note of it. From there, the conversation shifted to his relationship with Carmen. He admitted that video games had caused problems between them. Carmen often grew frustrated with how much time he spent playing and with the friends he invited over to join him. Those arguments had become a regular source of tension in their home. But that wasn't the only issue. He also confessed to feeling jealous about Carmen talking to an ex-boyfriend. He even admitted that he had read her emails without permission, showing how much mistrust had built up between them. He described their relationship as full of frustration, but he firmly denied harming her. At the end of the interview, he agreed to give detectives his DNA, fingerprints, and anything else they needed. Even so, he wasn't cleared. Investigators had to wait for the forensic test to come back before deciding if he could be ruled out. Soon enough, when the autopsy report would confirm the brutality Carmen went through, she had been killed in the most brutal attack. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide caused by multiple stab wounds. She had been stabbed 15 times with a small steak knife. The blade broke during the assault, and the tip was found lodged inside her ribcage. But the attack didn't stop there. Investigators discovered that a second weapon, a butcher knife, was used to stab her 7 more times. The use of 2 different knives showed that this wasn't a quick or impulsive act. Whoever did this left the room to get another weapon and then continued the attack. That level of determination revealed rage, intent, and a personal connection. Based on the nature of the injuries alone, detectives believed the killer was someone Carmen knew. The brutality of the assault, the choice of weapons, and the persistence behind it all pointed to a crime driven by anger and betrayal, not by chance. Detectives began widening their search, asking who else might have had access to Carmen's apartment. Even though her boyfriend was still under suspicion, they couldn't ignore the possibility of other people being involved. While waiting for his DNA results, detectives needed to know who else came into Carmen's space regularly. They asked her live-in boyfriend to list the people who spent hours there, not just casual visitors. He gave them 2 names, both men he worked with, who often came over to play video games and hang out. However, one of those names given would quickly lead nowhere. Detectives checked his whereabouts and cleared him, but the other name, Robert Harvey, stopped them in their tracks. The moment investigators heard it, memories surfaced. This is where it gets weirdly interesting. One detective recalled past encounters with Robert and confirmed with a colleague that he had been on their radar before. Years earlier, Robert had been connected to a sexual assault allegation. Detectives had tried to serve a warrant, but he left the state. The case collapsed when the woman involved no longer felt safe moving forward, and Robert faced no consequences.
Not long after, Carmen's parents arrived at the station as well. An officer was assigned to speak to Carmen's mother. When she was told that her daughter had died, she screamed and collapsed to the floor. Carmen's father reacted physically as well.
Still, Robert wasn't the only person detectives needed to clear. Another important figure was Carmen's ex-boyfriend. He had been one of the last people to speak with her. When interviewed, he explained that he had talked to Carmen the day before she was killed. They had been planning to meet, and their communication had gone beyond emails. Carmen had told him she needed money, so he sent her a MoneyGram to Walmart to help with gas and car expenses. After she picked it up, she never called him back. He said he kept trying, calling, texting, but she didn't respond. During the interview, detectives noticed he was visibly shaken. He spoke quietly at times, struggling to process what had happened. He expressed regret, saying that if he had urged Carmen to leave her situation sooner, she might still be alive. Investigators described him as well-groomed, articulate, and educated. He lived in Gulfport, about 2.5 hours from Jackson, which made it less likely he was directly involved. Still, detectives knew impressions weren't enough. His alibi had to be checked and his phone records reviewed, a process that would take another day or two. Until then, nothing could be ruled out. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As detectives dug deeper, Robert Harvey's name kept coming up. Conversations with people familiar with the neighborhood painted a troubling picture. A confidential source explained that Robert carried a reputation one woman in the area knew about and warned each other of. He was the kind of man who seemed harmless at first, but became dangerous once he had control of a situation. The pattern was familiar: someone welcomed inside, whose behavior shifted behind closed doors. And now, this same man had been spending time inside Carmen's apartment. With that, investigators now had a new focus. Looking into Robert's past, the picture sharpened quickly. His record was long and violent: robberies, assaults, repeated arrests. He wasn't new to law enforcement. But buried in that history was one charge that would change everything. Robert was a killer. He had killed before. Years earlier, he strangled his ex-girlfriend with a telephone cord inside her home, while her children were present. It was a brutal case that ended with a manslaughter conviction and a 20-year sentence.
When detectives asked him why he didn't call 911, he said that he was scared. At that moment, investigators didn't need his explanation to make sense, because what mattered was that Harvey had now done something he hadn't done before. He had put himself inside Carmen's apartment. And so detectives pressed further.
However, it was only after examining the evidence that the horrifying truth emerged. Robert never served that full time. Because of prison overcrowding, he was released after just 5 years. To detectives working Carmen's case, that fact hit hard. A man who had already taken a life violently was now connected to another woman who had been stabbed repeatedly in her own home. These two case similarities were impossible to ignore. Both crimes involved extreme violence. Both victims were women Robert knew personally. Right at that moment, that history pushed him straight to the top of the suspect list. However, detectives didn't have to wait long to bring him in. Robert had outstanding traffic warrants, which gave officers the legal reason they needed to stop him. He was arrested without incident. In custody, Robert was calm, polite, cooperative, answering questions with "yes, sir" and "no, sir." But then, a single clue brought the case into sharp focus. When asked where he had been the night Carmen was killed, Robert claimed he was visiting a friend named Michelle, who lived in an apartment complex near Carmen's. But when detectives checked, Michelle told them she hadn't seen Robert in weeks, maybe even months. His alibi collapsed instantly. When detectives first pushed Robert Harvey with tough questions, he suddenly stopped talking. He asked for a lawyer, and once he did that, the police had to end the interview. Without enough proof to keep him locked up, there was a real chance he might walk free. But the very next day, Robert would surprise them. He asked to speak again, this time without a lawyer. By then, he knew he had been caught lying. He also believed the police might already have his DNA. That realization changed everything, and his story began to shift. Robert admitted that he did know Carmen. He even placed himself inside her apartment. He claimed that Carmen and him had planned to have sex that day. According to him, when he walked in, he saw Carmen wrapped in a blanket with a knife in her body. He said he panicked and ran out. When detectives asked why he didn't call 911, he answered simply, he was scared. For investigators, the details didn't add up. But what mattered most was that Harvey had finally admitted being inside Carmen's apartment the first time he had done so. Detectives pressed harder. They asked him directly why his DNA might be found on the knife used to kill Carmen. That question stopped him cold. He went quiet, staring straight ahead, clearly trying to invent a new explanation. After a long pause, he changed his story again. He said maybe he had touched the knife when checking on Carmen. Then Robert introduced an entirely new version of events. He claimed that he and his brother had gone to Carmen's apartment together. According to him, while he and Carmen were in the bedroom, his brother was in another room stealing things. Robert said Carmen saw what was happening and threatened to call the police. That, he claimed, was when his brother pulled out a knife and killed her. However, detectives didn't believe him. The story kept changing, and each version made less sense than the last. What they saw was a man trying to escape responsibility, twisting his words to fit the evidence, but never giving a clear or honest account of what really happened. When detectives pushed Robert Harvey too far, he stopped talking. He asked for a lawyer, and once he did that, the police had to end the interview. But by then, something important had already happened. Robert had admitted that he knew Carmen, that he had been inside her apartment the night she was killed, and that he had touched the knife used in the attack. Even though he kept saying he wasn't the killer, those admissions were enough to change everything. Soon after, Robert was charged with capital murder. That charge carried the highest stakes because in Mississippi, a conviction for capital murder can mean the death penalty. If the case went to trial and prosecutors convinced a jury he was guilty, execution was a real possibility. That reality shaped what happened next. Robert's lawyers knew the risk was enormous, so instead of gambling on a trial, they approached prosecutors to discuss a deal. Their goal was simple: protect Robert from a possible death sentence. Negotiations followed, and eventually both sides reached an agreement. Robert would plead guilty, and in return, he would be sentenced to life in prison. On May 9, 2011, Robert formally pled guilty to first-degree murder. The court accepted the plea, and he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. There would be no jury trial, no penalty phase, no public debate over aggravating or mitigating factors. For the state, the plea guaranteed Harvey would never walk free again. For Carmen's family, the outcome meant the case ended without the uncertainty of a death penalty trial. It also spared them from hearing every painful detail laid out in open court. Still, the plea carried its own weight. Robert admitted responsibility, but the full story of Carmen's final moments would never be told in front of a jury.
Harvey said that he had gone to the apartment to check on Carmen and may have touched the knife. But the story didn't stop there. Harvey then introduced an entirely new version of events. He claimed that he and his brother had driven to Carmen's apartment together. According to him, while he and Carmen were in the bedroom having sex,
After Robert Harvey pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison, the legal chapter of Carmen Sanders' story was technically closed. But for her family, friends, and community, the end of the trial did not mean an end to the questions, the grief, or the emptiness left by her absence. Carmen's parents had lost a daughter who was vibrant, focused, and full of promise. Her dreams of becoming a lab technician, building a stable future, and living independently were gone in an instant. Every detail of her life, her classes, her jobs, her careful planning, stood in stark contrast to the violence that took it all away. They had lost not just a daughter, but the woman she was becoming. Friends remembered her determination, her focus, and the way she juggled school, work, and everyday life with grace. Carmen wasn't someone who drew attention to herself unnecessarily. She was quiet in her diligence, making decisions to improve her life without fanfare. That quiet planning, that ordinary sense of responsibility, made the sudden, violent end of her life all the more shocking. For Carmen Sanders, her story didn't end in the courtroom. It ended in an apartment where she felt safe, a young woman whose life was full of potential and whose future was stolen in the most violent way possible. The investigation, the confession, and the guilty plea resolved the legal questions, but they could never restore the life that was lost. This was Carmen's story. A life lived carefully, a young woman preparing for change, and a tragedy that came from proximity, access, and violence from someone she trusted, or at least knew. Even after the conviction, the memory of Carmen Sanders and the questions surrounding her life and death continue to resonate, a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can become irreversible. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.
his brother was in another room stealing items. Harvey said that Carmen came out, saw what was happening, and threatened to call the police. He claimed that that was when his brother pulled a knife and killed her.